Hi there, I'm Sarah Zarella, a portrait and wedding photographer and your host for Wedding Secrets Unveiled. This is a podcast where we cut through the complexity of wedding planning, leaving you with everything you need to know direct from the industry experts. If you want to simplify your wedding planning, while having fun, of course, you came to the right place. Join me while I guide you through your planning, starting from your engagement to your big day where you say, I do. After photographing for the past 18 years, I am sharing with you tips and tricks to cut through the excess noise because I believe from the moment you said yes, your planning experience should be a magical time in your life. Here you'll find episodes that are fun, stress-free, and straight to the point, with a fresh, honest take about the reality of what you really need to know about planning your perfect day. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. You are in for a treat today. I'm excited to introduce you to a close friend of mine, Brea Hutchinson from Hutchinson Financial. She is not only an expert in financial planning and my personal financial planner, but she's also a very close friend of mine. Brea and I actually grew up knowing each other as kids and play on the docks of the Greenwich Marina right here in Little Rhodey next to Cello's on the waterfront. For those Rhode Islanders, you know exactly where I'm talking about. I called Brea about a month ago to be a guest on the show because I knew she really could help you in your financial planning. See, getting married is not only about the wedding day, but it's also about the new chapter in your life. Yes, picking out flowers and tasting the cake, along with coming up with a signature drink and finding the perfect wedding dress, is all fun and part of the wedding planning process. But there's also a very practical part, what some may call maybe a very important part. She will be unveiling the secrets and the tips of how to come up with a financial plan for your new chapter in your life. We're calling this episode Financial Things to Do Before You Say I Do. Brea will be sharing how opening up about your finances to your fiancé and discussing debt, income, savings, and obligations is such a vital part of the successful marriage. She's going to walk us through about how to make a plan. And also, too, will you be commingling your money or will you not be commingling your money? She'll be sharing views on savings, retirement, etc. And finally, she's going to chat with us a little bit about tips about unveiling the communication process about money, spending, and savings. This is a very practical conversation along with an important conversation, all at the same time. So I hope you guys enjoy, sit back, and relax and listen to my conversation with Brea. So let's dive in. Well, welcome, Brea.
Well, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on the show. I know that when I started doing this podcast, you were one of the first ones I called. I said, Brea, will you be a guest on my show? Because I just felt like it's so important when you're getting married to also think about the marriage, not just the wedding day.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you being here, and I would love for you to let our listeners know who you are, who you serve, and what you do in your business.
Sure. So my name is Brea Hutchinson. I own Hutchinson Financial. We're located in West Warwick, Rhode Island. We service Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and many more states because I have clients that move all over, and we follow them. I've been in the business for 18 years. I have a background in finance. I have an MBA. I help clients plan financially. I help them establish financial goals. I help them create a plan, to be able to accomplish those goals and ultimately build wealth over the time of their life.
So how many years have you been doing this?
This is my 18th year.
18.
It's crazy. We're not old enough, right?
No, you know what? I've been doing photography for 18 years.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Time flies when you're having fun. I really do enjoy my job, so.
I know. Actually, I talked a little bit about in the opening how we grew up together, but then there was years apart. You went to college, I went to college, and then we reconnected.
When I got engaged.
Yep. And also, too, at a B&I group when we first started.
So I invited you to that B&I group.
Yes.
Yeah. So I got engaged, and my mother had said to me, oh, you know who does photography? Sarah Zarella's back in town, and she does photography. You should have her do your engagement session. And I said, that's fantastic. I'll definitely reach out. So we
went to Garden Park.
Yep, we went to Garden Park, and we did beautiful pictures on the beach, and it was wonderful. And then we I mentioned the B&I group to you, and then it's actually funny because we're still very good friends with a good group of girls that we met from that B&I group. So, it's fate. It was nice.
Yeah, we all were starting our career at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'll be married 15 years in August. So that was a while ago.
Yeah. It was about 16 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was about a year before your wedding. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And now here we are, and you're a very successful financial planner. And that's why I really think it was important to have you on. I really want you to kind of help our listeners. I mean, keep in mind, they're just starting out. They're starting out where you were 16 years ago, getting married, and that comes with a lot of heavy decisions.
Absolutely. I feel like a lot of people, when they're getting married, put so much time and energy into planning for the actual wedding. It's not so much planning for the marriage. You know, there's so much more that goes into two people taking their lives and merging them together after that day. You know, so, you got to think of things like this. You need to think what's going to happen after that day is complete. What happens after that? Have we prepared for that? And talking about finances and going through some of these important steps that we're going to talk about today is something that I think is really important to do before you get married. So you can open that communication. You can be really transparent with money and in finances with your partner, and hopefully set the stage for a really successful marriage.
So, Brea, you mentioned about being transparent. How important is it for you to be fully transparent about your money to your fiance before you get married?
So I think it's extremely important. People grow up in different households. So it's really important for you to understand how your fiance relates to money. You know, if you've got two individuals and one grew up in an affluent household who looked and spent money and saved money differently than, say, maybe their partner who maybe grew up struggling a little bit more, they're gonna relate to money differently. And it's important to really understand how your soon-to-be spouse is going to relate to money. So I think it's really important that you kind of talk about financial backgrounds. I also think it's really important to think about financial goals. So, what's important to you? Is it important to me? What would be important for the two of us as we move forward in our marriage? Things like simple things like, do you see yourself as owning a house, or have you never really thought about owning a house? Things that you might take for granted that someone's going to say yes to, that might not be the case. Maybe they grew up in a house that their parents never owned. So maybe owning property isn't important to them, and then you can go into much deeper things such as, do you guys want children? And if you want children, have you thought about how you're going to pay for that education? Is that something that's important? I have a lot of clients that sometimes get caught up in things like that later on. For instance, one says, no, my parents paid for my education. It's really important that I pay for my kids' education. And then we've got the other spouse saying, I paid for every penny of my education, and I think I got the most out of it because I had something invested in it, and I don't want to pay for my kids' education. Well, that's a fight 10 years later, 15, 20 years later, So I think it's important just to kind of throw that kind of stuff out there and make sure that you can communicate and openly talk about those things without having it cause a fight. And that way there you're aware. You're aware of how they feel about certain goals.
That's actually some great points because, some people might take for granted about owning that house, or if you want kids and paying for the education. But like you said, if you just think about, I guess your advice is think about what's important to you and just ask them, right?
Just ask them and open the conversation. A really big one that I see a lot too is maybe one spouse, if they decide to have children, really it's important for them to stay home. And maybe the other spouse is saying, no, I'm not okay with being the breadwinner and having all that pressure on me. Those are things that you really want to talk about. Not that it's going to stop you from getting married and walking down the aisle, but it's going to open that conversation so you feel more comfortable discussing it later on, and it doesn't go into a fight like, you didn't mention that to me. This is really important. It's nice to be able to just open those conversations and at least get it on the table about how you're feeling so that it's not a surprise to them later on.
And also, too, like you said, it's nothing that's going to make or break it. Things can also change, too. You might think that you want to be a one-income household, and then maybe down the road you have to be a two-income household,
right.
But it's at least opening up the communication about the finances.
Yeah, so it's not a surprise later.
Right.
You just don't want surprises.
So what about talking about the obligations and the savings and Can we get into
Debt.
debt? Oh, I didn't want to bring up the D word.
I know. Nobody does. But I see this more and more these days because obviously, college education is really expensive. So if you've got, a couple that have gone to college, a lot of times they might have some student loan debt. And we're seeing that amount rise more and more these days. Also, when you're young, you make stupid decisions and stupid mistakes. So we see a lot of credit card debt for younger individuals. So I think it's really important when you marry someone legally, you're joining yourself to them.
So Brea, let's talk a little bit about income, savings, obligations, and debt.
I know nobody wants to talk about it, but it's there. It really is there. Nowadays we see college education is getting more and more expensive. We're seeing younger individuals leaving college with extreme amounts of debt. When you're young, you make stupid decisions. A lot of times if you didn't go to college, maybe you have some credit card debt. Maybe you didn't pay a couple bills here and there and it's affected your credit. If I had $1 for every person I saw who was in debt and still drove a BMW, I'd be rich. It's amazing what you see when you're working with younger individuals who just don't really understand the financial world yet, and they're still finding their way. So I really find it important for individuals you're going to be taking your two lives and you're going to be marrying them as one legally. You're bound to each other. I think it's really important to know what you're getting into. What do they have for debt? Is there a plan for paying off that debt? Are they making regular payments? How has it affected their credit score? Just something silly. But if you do decide that one of your goals is to buy a house, do you know that if you need to buy it together, which most people do when they're married, they're going to take the credit score, whatever the lower credit score is, that's what they're going to apply for the mortgage with. Somebody could have a credit score in the 800s and your spouse could have one in the 600s. And when you go to apply for that mortgage together, they're going to look at the 600 one. They go with the worst one. So it's really important for you to know these things. Again, not so that you say, I'm not walking down the aisle, I'm done, That's not the key. The key is just to be transparent. We don't want surprises later on.
And also too knowledgeable. I mean, you did mention something, we joked about it, but you said, for all those people who are driving the really fancy car, but then they're in debt. I mean, you really want to make sure that you know exactly what's happening and what you are walking into.
Absolutely.
Nobody wants to talk about the debt word, the D word. No one wants to talk about the divorce word. We don't want to talk about that. But there is the number one leading cause of divorce is finances.
Absolutely. And I think a good part of that could be resolved if people are more honest and open before marriage on how they feel about money, how they're going to treat money. Are you a saver? Are you a spender? That's a huge thing. I see that with clients all the time. They come in and their biggest argument is, I'm trying to save and they're spending. How do we go move past this?
So maybe what you're saying, one of the successful keys of starting off on the right foot for a marriage would be contacting a financial planner right away. And then you can help them with a plan?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people have the misconception that financial advisors are people who help people with money. And that is not what we are here for. I mean, obviously, if you have money, we will help you manage that. But the key is for a financial advisor is for education. We want to educate you on the things.
So even if you're just starting out, sorry, not to interrupt you, but you're saying even if you're just starting out and you're maybe you are in debt and you don't have savings, it's still okay to get a financial planner on board.
Absolutely. And if you find the right financial advisor, a lot of people will come to me and say, I can't afford you. And I say, well, how much do you think I cost? What do you mean you can't afford me? What will save you on the back end is going to be well worth it. But we're also people too. We work with people. We have, my firm in general, we have advice pay where we can charge you a very small amount monthly that you and then we're your resource for all things financial. We help you with the budget. We help you with goals. We do your financial planning. We'll help you with your investments. But every millionaire from tomorrow has to start somewhere. Right? Mm-hmm. And if they don't get the proper financial education in the beginning of their adult life, then they're never going to have those key components to be able to build that wealth for later on. So we don't want people not to reach out, and we don't want people not to get that advice because they think they can't afford it. That's silly.
So you can really just help couples from the moment that they put that ring on each other's fingers, not each other, one finger, fair enough, one finger, to really starting to help them ask the questions that need to be asked, setting up a plan, talking about the debt, and the goal to get them out of that. Also, too, the savings, and that you can set them up from the very beginning.
We do. And you know what? Sometimes by meeting with somebody who's a third party, I always joke with my clients and say, listen, if you set goals and you're not accomplishing those goals, wouldn't it be better if I'm the one that holds you accountable? It's hard for couples to hold themselves accountable because it causes friction, whereas if you've got somebody else holding you accountable, it's a little easier. It's that, Brea said we can't go to dinner tonight because, we set our goal and we already hit that for the month,
I don't know about you, but I love talking finance with Steve. It's my favorite thing. Actually, let's back up for a second.
Really hides under the bed when we talk about finances. Don't let her fool you.
Brea, you know this. It's like, so just as I told you guys, Brea's my financial planner. She does house visits, by the way, and she'll come over and we'll sit around the kitchen counter, and now I have to put like Brea's financial planning cap on, not Brea, my friend. And she'll start talking to me and I'm literally just staring.
I lose her about 3 minutes in.
I get it. It's just not my cup of tea. And, but funny enough, in my household, I'm the one that goes through the bills. So, I'm just a little bit more organized, let's just say. So, and Brea actually was, for those people who are listening, she'll set you up with this whole software system that you can put actually it doesn't, you don't even do it.
It's called eMoney.
Yes.
And it's an online program that really manages all your finances.
Yeah. So
if you use, for me, I use a debit card and a credit card, basically to pay for everything. Very seldom do I actually have cash on me. It's pretty sad. It's not years ago when, I was bartending and I could put a couple of 20s in my pocket. Right. Now my paycheck goes into my banking account and I never go and take it out. So if you use your debit card to pay things like your mortgage and your car payment and your, maybe your cable bill or whatever it might be that comes automatically out of your banking account, and then you've got your credit card for all your other incidentals that you might do, you can actually link those to the eMoney software and it'll pull in all your expenses and it'll analyze your spending, which is really great because the budget, I know everyone hates the B word too. Mm-hmm. Budget. Who wants to spend the time to say this is what's coming in and this is what's going out? Well, we have programs that do that now for you.
I love it because, we talked about how you start talking money to me and my eyes go cross. But you know what? With this little software that I plug in each month, it does pie charts for me.
It does.
It does graphs for me. It puts it in categories.
Yeah. You can even set limits. Like I only want to spend, $400 a month with going out to dinner. And you can set a limit. It's not going to stop you. It's not going to cut you off if you go over. Right. It's not going to decline your credit card. But it'll tell you, hey, you're $50 over for the month. So and you can, change if you want to for the next month. But we have software like that will help. Budgeting is really important for especially younger couples who are just, getting married or getting engaged. Knowing what you have coming in, knowing where it's going. The biggest, I'm married for 15 years now, almost 15 years. I've got 2 young children. I can promise you, finances are only going to get more difficult and more complicated as you get older. So setting some really good goals and limits, I would say, when you're younger and sticking to those is such a good thing to do. And it's only going to be successful for you later on.
So basically, Brea, you're like the money police, right?
I am.
All right. Exactly. So I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Should newly married couples, should they commingle their finances? And if so, or if not, what's the pros and cons of each?
Yeah. So this is such a personal decision. I have seen more, in the beginning of my career 18 years ago, nobody kept their finances separate when they were married. It was really, I would see it every once in a while when it was a second marriage for an older couple. But typically when I was working with the married couple, they had commingled funds. These days,
you're seeing a trend then.
I'm seeing a trend that it's changing. Now I'm starting to see it a lot more where their finances stay separate. And I think that there's a combination of why that is the case. Maybe you have one person who's much more in debt than the other. And, the person who's not in debt says, I don't want to take that on. That's their responsibility. Let's keep our finance. There's a lot of different reasons why they might keep them separate. But I think that there are some benefits to both. And it's a personal decision on how they feel. my thought process is it's easier to do planning when you have commingled funds. It's really hard sometimes if you're keeping money separately to determine who pays for what. So you could easily say these are the household expenses, and each person's going to put $1,500 into the pot and pay for all the household expenses. Great. But now let's say the yard work needs mulch. And then you're constantly going to your spouse and saying, oh, you owe me $150. You owe me $75. Oh, I bought a rake the other day. You owe me $20. It can get complicated. And when children come, it gets even more complicated. Who's picking up the diapers? Who's buying food? Who's buying formula? And it gets really complicated with who's spending what. When you're married, it's much easier to just say, we're in this together. Mm-hmm. This is our world, and whatever you make is mine, and whatever I make is yours. And I think it tends to be a little bit easier. But then the downside of that is sometimes you can get into arguments about what the other's spending money on.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So, sometimes what I recommend, and this can work well for some people, is maybe you manage your finances together and you commingle the funds. It's always really important at a bank that you put two names on a banking account, because if you keep banking accounts separate, if God forbid something happened to your spouse, the other money doesn't go directly to you. It has to go through probate, and it gets complicated.
Ooh, note to self, guys. Listen.
Yeah, I know you have an attorney coming on, but and I'm sure they'll probably talk about that at some point, or maybe they did.
But that's a good point. Note to self. That's a good little tip right there. So You're saying just plug that tip again, because that was a good one.
So you want to make sure when you have accounts at a bank, you want to make sure that there's two names on that banking account. If my husband and I have separate banking accounts, and I've got only my name on my banking account and he's got only his on his, banking accounts don't have beneficiaries listed on them. So if something were to happen to me, my accounts don't go directly to him because his name's not on them. He actually has to go through probate to prove that he's the rightful beneficiary owner of that. And it's complicated, and it takes money, and it takes time, and it's pain. So I say, even if it's your money and you're managing it separately from your husband, you might want to just throw their name on it, just to make sure that that's taken care of. But what can sometimes work is maybe you commingle your funds, and maybe each of you holds one separate savings account that is in both your names, but one is for one spouse, one's for the other. And maybe you come up with a number. Maybe you say, okay, for $50 a month goes into those accounts. And that's my extra stuff that I can do, and the extra stuff that the other spouse can do. And then that way there, if you want to buy a gift for your spouse, you can either save that money up and use that, or buy a cheaper gift. Whatever you want to do, it's not like you're buying your own gift as the other spouse. So sometimes that works really well too.
That's nice too, because then, like you said, it's something special. It's your entertainment money, you know?
Right.
So it's
your little extra.
Your little extra. So what are some of the you talked about some of the pros on commingling, because it's just obviously a lot easier to financial plan, and also too, you're not then kind of just going through the nitty gritty of oh, you owe me this, or I paid for this. What are some of the pros of separating and not commingling then?
So you're not really in control of what your partner's spending, so that it takes that fight out.
Fair enough.
Oh, so you spend $150 on a spa day last month. We can't really afford that. They don't know. It's they don't know what you're spending your extra money on it. All they know is that you made the commitment to the household, and you made that. They don't know what the extra money's going.
So there's no argument there.
There's no argument there. But I will tell you, it can open the door for other arguments. So let's just say that one spouse is doing better than the other financially. Let's say one makes more than the other. Well, you want to go on a family vacation. What if one spouse can afford it and the other one says, I can't?
Oh, boy.
Do you go without the other spouse? Or what,
Good God. So much to think about here.
Which can happen if you've got somebody who's making more than the other. Also, it's important to talk about things like, how much are you putting away for retirement? Mm-hmm. Are you saving for your part of the retirement here in this relationship? If you've got somebody who's maybe got less dispensable cash, but it's because they're putting 10% into their retirement fund, and then you've got one spouse who's got a lot more cash, but they're putting nothing towards their retirement fund. Well, I can see that being a big issue.
That's
come
a big
65
issue.
And one's retiring and the other one can't.
Right.
And I have clients that come to me that say, I want to do some financial planning, and I say, oh, you single? No, but I'm just going to do my financial planning. And I say, okay, what's the deal? Is your spouse just not going to ever retire? And they say, well, that's his or her problem. And I say, okay, well, what happens if they plan to never retire and they don't do their job saving? But what if they become disabled at 75? That's going to affect your retirement, right?
So just like, their debt affects you later on, like an accident or
their
something.
Lack of planning.
And also too, like you said, maybe one of the pros of not commingling is you don't take on their debt, but like you said, down the road, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the future is going to entail. If you have one spouse go on disability, then,
can change everything.
And
I don't necessarily always think it's a really bad thing to have to take on a spouse's debt. My own situation, I was lucky enough to have parents that paid for my education 100%. My husband also has a master's degree. He paid for every penny himself. When we got married, he had student loan debt, but we tackled it as a couple. We sat down, we went through our finances. It helped that I was a financial advisor and I understood this stuff because I was like, this is what you're going to do.
Right.
This is how we're going to do it. But we went through it and we were able to get him out of that debt much quicker as a couple working together than he would have ever been able to do on his own. So, sometimes that's a good thing, but it has to be something that you discuss and you feel comfortable with, whatever plan you move forward with.
Well, that actually leads me to my next question because you're kind of talking about what you did in your personal story when you first got married, but what is some key pieces of financial advice for newly engaged couples and newlyweds that you can give to them?
So my biggest thing would be transparent with your finances. Don't hide anything. Make sure you're really honest with what your income is, what your debt is. And then secondly, plan together. Have it be the first thing you do as a couple. Get together with an advisor and start building a financial plan together. So that you can feel like you're doing something together moving forward as a couple.
Brea, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I think we should talk a little bit about the communication around money, spending, and savings.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you like what you're hearing, I encourage you to check out our website at sarahzarella.com. And don't forget you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. And I would so appreciate if you left a fabulous review on Apple Podcast. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support. And now, let's get back to the episode. Well, welcome back, podcast friends. So right before the break, we were talking with Brea about some key communication tips that we should be thinking about when talking to our spouses or our fiance. So Brea, with that said, what are some key tips that you can give our listeners to start the conversation going?
So I would say one of the biggest things I would tell couples would be to prioritize it. Prioritize financial planning. So whether you're working with someone or you're doing it yourself, if you're budgeting, you and your partner want to deliberately make time to plan. So, maybe it's once a month, maybe it's every couple months, maybe it's if you're a spender, maybe it's once a week. Every Sunday night at 9:00 we sit down and talk about what we spent for the week. You could, do it more often if you needed to, but you should really make the time to say, are we sticking to the plan? Are we spending what we need to spend? Are we saving what we need to save? Are we making sure we're sticking by our goals? So I would say that's really important. I also really like having, obviously I'm partial, I'm a financial advisor, but it's really nice to just have that third person. Sometimes, if you're in marriage counseling, and you're working through a problem, it's nice to have that counselor say to you, well, did you think about how they felt with this? Did you think about maybe if this happened? And you've got somebody to bounce different scenarios off of you. Financial planners do the same thing financially. So recently I had a client of mine who came into the office, and it's a couple and they're getting married in September. I work with her parents, and now I work with her, and now that she's engaged, I work with her fiance, and it's great. And she's a saver, and she has a hard time spending, a large amount of money. She wants to make sure she was instilled with this with her parents, and they're great savers, and I think it's fantastic. But they were talking about what to spend for their honeymoon. And they had this wonderful trip planned out. And she was really having a hard time, writing the check for it. And he said to me, can we come in and talk to you about it? And can you let us know whether or not this is silly or if this is something that we can afford to do? I said, absolutely. They came in. We ran their plan numbers. We looked, they're even looking into retirement, looking at the numbers to see if they're saving enough for retirement.
Wow, they're ahead of the game.
Oh, yeah, they're on it. But we help them do that.
Right.
We make them aware of the earlier you start with that, the better off you're going to be.
Absolutely.
So we went through everything, and I sat back and said, go on the trip. Take that trip. You can afford it. So sometimes just having that other person, say, it's okay. You can do that. You can buy that house. You can go on that trip. It's not all about, well, you got this debt and, you can't spend this and you can't spend that. We're also about the fun things too.
Right. Sometimes, Steve and I joke around. He calls me Shoulda Sarah. That's like my nickname in the household. It's, he'll be like, because I'll believe it or not, sometimes I have second guess my decisions, right? So it's like, oh, here comes Shoulda Sarah. So, obviously when it comes to the finances, sometimes when you say certain things that we got to do certain things, I'm like, I'm not Shoulda Sarah. Brea said it. So there you go.
Brea said it was okay to do it.
Exactly. So Brea, I got a question for our listeners. How can they find, obviously I would love for them to find you, but how can they actually find a great financial planner?
Yeah. So there's a couple of tips that I could give you when you're looking for a financial advisor and making sure that you find someone who's right for you. Number one, it's always great to get a referral. If you've got, maybe your parents or grandparents or an aunt and uncle or a really good friend that's working with someone that they love, ask them for their name and number. It's always great to be able to get a referral from someone who's worked with somebody else for years and that they are the ones that they call you back. They do annual reviews. They make sure they respond in a timely manner, that they're, managing whatever they might be managing well. So get a referral. Another really important thing is FINRA, which is our regulatory board for the U.S. It's FINRA, FINRA. They have a broker check. So you can go to FINRA broker check, you can Google it, and it brings up this broker check, and you can put a person's name in there, in their firm, and you can look at how long they've been in business, you can look at what states they're registered in, and most importantly, you can look to see if they've ever had any disclosures on their U4. Their U4 is like our license, our financial advising license, and if they've ever had a client complaint, it'll be on there. If they've ever had a client complaint that's led to like a settlement, it'll be on there. So often I have clients come to me that say, oh, we don't really love our advisor. Something's going on that I don't like. And I'll look up the advisor real quick and I'll say, you didn't look him up or her up because there's 3 complaints on the thing. So
I never knew about that.
Yeah. So there's the FINRA broker check.
So that's a little tip. So listeners, can you spell it out?
So it's FINRA, FINRA. And if you Google FINRA broker check, you can put whoever you're talking to or whoever you got as a referral, you can put their name in there and their firm. Or if you don't have their firm name, you could put in just the location of their office. So like for me, you could put Brea Hutchinson, West Warwick, Rhode Island, and our U4 comes up. And you can see if there's any disclosures or anything that you need to know. Another really important thing when you pull up that U4, you want to make sure that the license is a financial advisor. So you want to, in our business, we have to get series licensed. And we have a series 7, which means that we can do full investments. So we can do stocks, ETFs, mutual funds, everything. Some advisors only have a 6, which really only allows them to do mutual funds. You really want to make sure you're working with a series 7 advisor just because they have the full range of investments to offer you. And a lot of times Series 6 advisors might often, maybe work for an insurance company or maybe they're not full financial advisors. And then you want to make sure that they're listed as a financial advisor and not such as like a registered representative. Then they can sell you a product, but they can't necessarily give you financial advice. So another tip there. And then look for experience. Make sure you're working with someone who's been in the business for a little while. Believe it or not, everything we do in our career, we don't always learn in school. I would say probably 20% of it I learned in school and 80% of it I learned doing it and working on the job. And I'm not to say that you shouldn't work with an advisor that's been in the business for a short amount of time. We've got some people in our firm that have maybe less than 5 years experience, but they work under us. So if you're working with a newer advisor, make sure that there's a senior advisor in that firm that's managing and overseeing everything that they're doing to make sure that you're getting the full expertise of a financial advisor there.
So let's talk a little bit about cost and pay. Mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of people listening right now, like you said, like they're just starting out, so they might think that they can't afford you. I mean, you said earlier in the show that a lot of people actually say that. Mm-hmm. So what is someone looking at for cost of a financial advisor?
Right. So I'll start by saying we get paid two different ways. Financial advisors either charge a fee for our planning. Our planning takes a lot of time. I mean, if we're meeting with somebody and we're budgeting for them and we're going over all these numbers and stuff, we need to get paid for our time. We've gone to school, we've got the experience, we need to get paid. So sometimes we charge a fee.
You don't work for free?
No, I don't work for free. I wish I did a lot of times. I would really love to help everyone out, but unfortunately, we can't. So we do charge fees for our planning. A set fee for plan, probably $500 and up is what most financial advisors will charge. Up meaning that it's more complicated. And like I said, we try to make it affordable for everyone. So we have a thing called advice pay that you can pay monthly. So maybe if it's a $600 plan, you can pay $50 a month. And, we're at your disposal to answer any financial questions that come your way. There's some people in our office that are a little, they've been in the business a little less. They might even go down to $40 or $30 a month.
But that's great, though, because then they're underneath your umbrella.
They are.
So that's a great way for somebody who maybe can't afford another type of advisor. They can afford someone who's underneath your umbrella.
Absolutely. And we try to make it affordable for everyone. And then the second way we get paid is through management of funds. So if you've got somebody who has an IRA or a Roth IRA or just an investment account or a 529 plan or whatever it might be that we help them manage, there is actually fees internally on those funds that people might not realize, and we'll make you aware of them and we'll make sure you understand them. But a percentage of those internal fees come to us as your manager.
Well, thank you for going over all that. I'm sure a lot of listeners were thinking that as far as, how to pay for a financial planner or what to expect for payment or what the cost is. There's clearly a ton of benefits for having a financial planner. Before we get into the wrap-up question, is there anything else, Brea, that you might want to add?
Yeah. So one of the things that keeps floating around in my head that I want to make sure I get out is a lot of times when you're being transparent with your partner and you're talking about finances, it's not always just the negative things. Sometimes you've got a partner who is really strong in a specific area. So maybe you've got somebody who's really detailed oriented, Sarah, like you mentioned for you, that can do the budget and can pay the bills and keep track of what's going out. And then you've maybe got a partner who's better at understanding the investments part.
Well, that's us.
So
that's me and Steve.
Exactly.
He understands that end, but I'm very.
I think you understand more than you go. You just don't want to go. You just don't want to have to talk about it.
Don't. We're live, Brea. We're live.
Hopefully Steve doesn't listen. No, but there's a lot of benefits that you get out from leaning on your partner's strengths and letting them lean on your strengths. And I think by talking about this stuff and being open and honest about it, you can really figure out in a relationship who's going to be better at what roles. And I think that's a really positive thing.
And it's awesome. I think it's great to end on that. A very positive note. There you go. You can at least figure out the strengths, and also too, then you can both feel really good about going on that honeymoon or spending money on something that you really wanted to do.
Or family vacation. Yeah. Sometimes those goals aren't just retirement 40 years out. Some of those goals are
right now.
Family vacation once a year or saving for that house, or you're never gonna accomplish those goals if you don't set plans in motion to be able to get those accomplished. So if you want a successful life as a couple financially, and you want to make sure that together you're moving in that right direction, then you want to plan for it.
I love it. So with that said, let's do the wrap-up question.
Okay.
What are some key points that couples should be asking financial planners when they are inquiring to make sure that they are working with a professional company to ensure that their financial future is well planned and mapped out for complete success?
So one, make sure you're transparent about the fees. So ask them what it's going to cost. Ask them the scope of what they're going to help you with. And then another thing that I think is really important is make sure they're independent. You really want to work with somebody who's not tied to one company. You want to make sure they're a non-captive advisor and they can work with many, many companies. So those are all really important things to ask for.
And also, too, I would assume that education, maybe?
Absolutely. Education. Find out if they have a degree. Find out their background. I always like to see, and you can see this on the FINRA check, too, how many firms they've worked for. If you've got somebody who's been in the business for 6 years and they've got 3 firms on their U4, you might say, why are they not staying with that company? You know, if they're bouncing around a lot. Be careful, because on that FINRA, it'll say whether or not, if it's a company that merged, then don't hold that against them.
Right.
You know, there was no choice in that matter. But if it was an actual employment move, then that's something you want to take a look at. You really want somebody who's stable, who's been in the business for a while, has the education, has the resources. My clients will always ask me, and this is even from before. I remember being pregnant and them saying, "Are you coming back to work when you pop out that baby?" And I would say, "No, I'm coming back. But you want somebody who's invested in their practice. Do they own the firm? Do they have employees? Are they young enough where they'll be around for a while, but old enough where they have experience? Or if not, do they have a succession plan? I'm not saying you can't work with somebody who's in their 60s. They're probably great advisors too. But make sure they have who's going to be taking over for them. Do they have that in place so that in 10 years you're not left with having to find a new advisor? So all really important questions to ask when you're looking for an advisor.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of Wedding Secrets Unveiled. You helped our listeners become one step closer to their journey of a stress-free wedding planning and marriage process. Can you tell everybody where to find you?
Sure. So my name is Brea, Brea. Last name's Hutchinson. I'm sure you can see me on the podcast advertisements. But you can email me at bhutchinson at wradvisors.com. If you Google me, my website will come up, and I'm right here, local in Rhode Island.
And what I'll also do for the listeners is we will have Brea's information along with the show notes on our blog and on our website, which is at sarahzarella.com/podcast. Thank you for listening to Wedding Secrets Unveiled. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, I want to tell you something. I encourage you to check out our website at sarahzarella.com. We love photographing while having fun, of course. Check out our podcast page on our website for our show notes along with upcoming episodes with your local wedding experts. Listen in as we help you plan your epic event. And don't forget that you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. I would so appreciate if you left a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support and let us know what you think. If you know any wedding experts that would like to be a guest, we have a link directly on our website where they can let us know. Thank you for listening.